Hello there guys. As you may or may not know, I'm also a War Thunder player and I kinda grow fond of that game. However, I've noticed that many players have trouble setting up the configuration and aiming for their vehicle, and that makes them a little bit frustrated over the game. And to prevent this, in this episode, I'm gonna be talking about how to aim in ground realistic battles. The other type of battles are gonna be mentioned in further separate episodes. This video is not a list of weak spots or some magic training guide. It's gonna be how to aim on your own, because there is no single aim point that works for all the vehicles. There's so many of them in War Thunder that it will be borderline impossible to fit them in one guide. I want you to understand what your shield does, how the reticle works, how to read the target, so you'll be able to aim with any vehicle of your choice after a couple practice shots. This guide is aimed also at beginners or like early intermediate players, and especially those that feel a little bit lost in ammo choices or a little bit inconsistent. Like I said, I'm gonna be focusing on ground realistic battles in this video, and to make things completely clear, settings and keybinds will appear at the bottom of the screen, so you can find them easier and change it to whatever fits you. Because I'm not gonna give you the dogma that it has to be set to this specific key because that's meta. No, just set it up to whatever you feel comfortable with. I'm just gonna help you find the setting. Okay, that was kind of lengthy introduction, so let's actually go to the guide. First, before you even start aiming at a target, you need to actually find it. And that's usually the hardest part of anything if it comes to realistic ground battles, as enemies won't have indicator above them that they are enemies. First of all, how the vision works in this game is that all the players are rendered at all times. Well, there is some minor exception on bigger maps might have troubles rendering them, but in general they're supposed to be visible. So try to use different kind of looking out for enemies. First and most basic one is just gonna be your view of the tank. This will allow you to look, for example, peek behind corners without exposing your vehicle, or above small rocks near you. This is good in close quarter fights on some small city maps, but it's not generally the best way of looking out for enemies. The best way is binocular view. Every single tank can use the binocular view of their commander to get slightly elevated view from above their vehicle. It also narrows your vision and zooms it a little bit, making so that you can swiftly cover very key spots and maybe determine if that bush is a bush or enemy tank. It also allows you to rotate your vision without having to rotate your turret with it. It's very useful if your tank has very slow turret traverse or no turret at all. What you need to look for is movement fast and not some kind of armor, because your eyes are generally pretty good at noticing movement rather than patterns. Patterns come second. And what you need to learn is not really silhouettes of very specific vehicles, but just silhouettes of vehicles. There are gonna be some tracks here and there that may confuse some players. So finding out a classic, a favorite vehicle of everyone, truck with gun, it's not gonna be as easy as finding big box called the Sherman, but it's still generally pretty good. Enemies will try to obstruct your vision by mounting bushes or hiding behind cover. So it's not always that you're gonna be seeing the whole tank. Very often you're just gonna see a peeking a turret looking directly at you. A very good extra thing is the exhaust smoke of the engine. Most players do not realize that engines create smoke that can be visible even if they are completely covered, and they usually do not go into I'm gonna disable my engine so the enemy doesn't see my smoke mode. You know how to identify a target now. So we kinda want to shoot and aim at them now. In binocular view, there is one extra thing that you want for that, and it's the fact that if you just press fire button during binocular view, it's not gonna fire your weapon, but it's gonna try to move your turret or gun as close as it can to the point where you clicked. So usually it's gonna rotate your turret there. Yeah, so finally moving on to the gunner's view. So we're supposed to shoot somebody, right? And in this place, I see a lot of players getting a little bit confused at what they're supposed to do. Because so far they've probably played only arcade type of games like World of Tanks, when all you have to do is place your reticle on the enemy and it's gonna instantly make so that the shell flies into them. But it's not like this in this game. Your reticle is not just a dot you place on the enemy. You're basically getting a set of rulers. You're getting the lines that help you estimate how the shell will drop based on the distance, and the lines that are supposed to give you prediction based on the relative speed to the enemy. I'm not gonna really talk about the ones that are supposed to give you the relative speed prediction, because usually it doesn't matter since you don't know the enemy's speed unless they are not moving. So it's usually not such a useful tool, especially for beginners. Maybe some higher end players use it, but well, so far I didn't find this part of the reticle useful. So we're gonna focus on estimating the distance. First of all, each of the marks represents you distance in 100 meters. So if you have your ruler, on the left side you have your scale. Each number you have to multiply by 100 meters. So you have, if you see 4 over there, multiplied by 100, 400 meters. You move this line to where the ruler is, and if enemy is 400 meters away, you set it for that bit. That's how your shell is gonna fly, and that's how your shell is gonna hit them. If they are further away, you obviously need to lift your gun much higher to estimate for bigger distance. As a bonus, you don't really need to actually lift your gun. You can set it up so that you can, for example, using your mouse scroll like I do, jump between each measurements of this ruler up and down without having to lift your gun up. However, this doesn't really allow you to set, for example, in the middle of it, so it's not really that accurate as you may think. Okay, so how do we actually tell the distance to the enemy? Well, we can use a rangefinder. Each of our tanks is equipped with some variant of rangefinder. Usually it's pretty shitty one that just gives us a rough estimate, and very often it just shows above 900 meters, and well, what can you do with that information, right? Also, it very often just takes forever to tell you the distance to the enemy. So you're left with having to actually guess the distance to the enemy. Very often how it happens is that you actually fire a shot to tell if it fell short or if it fell too high up, and then you make another estimation and you guess by that. But what I really want you to kinda get is that you can actually tell how much distance there is based on the minimap and what you have as landmarks. Landmarks in this game are definitely the caps, because the caps are always giving you the exact distance in meters from you to the cap. So, by looking at the minimap of your position and the cap circle, you can estimate how much, for example, is 3 by 1 triangle to the cap. You can also do some math there, but well, we're not here to do math, we're here to shoot people, right? So it's basically just a little bit of guessing here and there. The moment you unlock vehicles that have actual laser rangefinder, you're gonna get something that not only measures your distance to the enemy pretty accurately, it also measures it fast, which is more important. And later on, the laser rangefinder also gets an upgrade by once you press it, it automatically sets your gun to that distance. So all you have to do is press rangefinder on the enemy and then press fire button. That's pretty handy considering it can be mounted on something like a PCH 2000. Okay, but not every shell works the same, and now we have to talk about choosing the ammo types, which I think is the most confusing part for majority of the player base. So here's gonna be the shorter, much condensed version of it, so you can pretty easily set your tank up and then maybe from that point on get a little bit of a hand on the ammo. Because I'm not gonna describe you every single variation of the shell type, because that's gonna take a little bit too long. I'm gonna generalize a lot here. Simply hitting an enemy is usually not enough to eliminate them. You need to know where to hit them. And in this game, to eliminate an enemy vehicle, you need to basically reduce its crew to less than 2 men. And this can be done in various ways. You can shoot them one by one, or simply eliminate everyone by exploding ammo rack, overpressure, setting their tank on fire. There are many ways to achieve that, and they all come from using different kind of ammo. First, we have the basic solid shot shells, which is what I find as glorified throwing rocks at the enemy tank thing. AP, APC, and APCBC are basically just a solid metal shells with no explosive filler whatsoever. They just penetrate the armor and create fragments only where the shell physically passes through. This means that placement of where you choose to shoot the enemy tank matters a lot. You need to make sure that enemy tank either explodes within one shell or is disabled, so you can shoot it again and again and again. Very often what that means is either shooting from the side directly into the ammo rack, but that requires you to know where the ammo rack is. So first you try to disable the enemy tank by shooting its cannon breech or the gunner. Those shells are not very good at disabling tracks or the main gun itself, so you need to fire at those places. Usually it's gonna be to their left side of the turret. However, there are some tanks that have the gunner on the other side, and well, the general thing is that you first disable the enemy ability to shoot, then to move by shooting engine, and then you try to explode them via ammo or kill them one gunner at a time. If you hit empty space, you're just basically gonna be better not shooting them at all. Those shells also lose penetration with distance and struggle against angles, so you need to be also very careful of where you're aiming. Next we have the APAG and APAGBC. In this category we can also include the APCBC with explosive filler. How to tell if your shell has explosive filler? Just simply hover over it and see if it has some explosive mass. If it does, it falls in this category. Those shells have a fuse that activates upon penetrating specific amount of armor. You can also check it in the details. And after a brief delay, it will send fragments in all the directions with the explosion. This makes them extremely forgiving, and you won't need perfect module knowledge of the enemy. You just need penetration to eliminate most of the enemy tank, usually everything in that one compartment, such as turret or the lower half. Very often what happens is you disable enemy tank with the first shot for just enough time for you to reload and fire the another one to eliminate them completely. So the downside of it is that they are still pretty bad against angles and their penetration also drops with distance. However, they are extremely forgiving, so I find them as one of the best kind of shells you can have on middle to lower BRs. Okay, next kind of category are the shells that are more about penetration rather than dealing damage. And those will be the APCR, the APDS, and APFSDS. First, APCR are basically just high velocity penetrator, which is fast dense core made to just punch through the armor. Since they are fast, they don't really get a lot of drop off, regardless of the gun, because previously mentioned shell types have drop off based on the specific gun. Sometimes it's big, sometimes it's small. In here you just get very fast moving shell, regardless of what gun it's shot from, and it usually carries just enough penetration to pen through basically anything on its PR that is flat, because it performs pretty poorly against angles, and on top of that they also create very little damage. So you have very similar situation to what you had with the solid shot AP. But solid shot AP is usually pretty big. Once those are basically as if you were throwing needles at the enemy. APDS is a little bit better version of it, but it shares a lot of common lines with it. It still keeps the speed much better, and since those shells are based on speed, it retains the penetration pretty well. It still doesn't deal as much damage as the previous one. However, I feel like the APDS actually deals a little bit more damage than APCR. They are extremely easy at aiming, especially at the crew and modules, which combined with a lot of pen makes them really consistent. Don't expect much cold one-shots with them though, unless you know how to hit ammo rack every single time. APDS evolved into APFSDS, which is the modern gun. It usually is a long, high-speed penetrator, wink wink. It ignores angles better than other kind of shells here, and barely drops over distance thanks to the stabilization. However, it also only damages where it directly hits, and the penetration is still depending on the kinetic energy of the shell, which is its velocity. However, since they carry a lot of velocity, meaning a lot of pen, you don't really need to think about not penetrating more as and not having anything behind the part where you penetrated to destroy. So don't just shoot enemies blindly, not knowing where their ammo is or where their gun breech is. Those shells are mostly made on very high BRs, so if you do not hit the enemy and disable him, it's probably gonna be the end of you because you just notified them. So try to aim for gun breaches or ammo racks. For those that prefer a little bit more explosive, we have the whole bunch of shells created just for that. We're gonna start with Heat and Heat FS, because those are very special. Those shells usually have pretty big drop off as they do not really carry a lot of velocity because they don't need it for penetration, as their penetration doesn't depend on the distance. The problem with Heat FS and Heat is the interference, because those shells explode upon contact with basically anything. You can hit enemy track and do nothing. You can hit bush, tree, fence post, spaced armor, era, a bunch of mosquitoes and fireflies flying, and the shell is just gonna instantly arm and detonate. What you want to do is look for clean, flat armor without extra layers and that's where you want to shoot. Those shells have big penetration, but they don't really need to penetrate to deal damage as well. And that is because they create something called overpressure. This is most visible when you actually hit something that has 0 armor and you hit it in like corner and the shell explodes and suddenly you get a kill. How it happens is that those shells create overpressure that kills the crew inside, and since open top vehicles are especially vulnerable to this, heat shells became you just hit this box or truck with gun and you get free kill. Similar thing happens when you fire at those kind of targets with HE. As well, HE is basically, I don't care about penetrating you all, I'm just gonna create big blast, big boom, and send fragments everywhere. HE is so powerful that sometimes you don't really need to direct hit on something that is truck with gun to eliminate it out of the battle. For light vehicles and open tops, very often you just need to hit them anywhere to eliminate them. However, HE has a big problem in dealing with heavily armored targets. For those, you need to actually aim at the roof or where there's a lot of space after the explosion that can create a lot of fragments that smash the crew inside. It can also be done if you just hit underneath the target, because the floor is also pretty much not armored. HE also comes in a variant of proximity fuse, and this detonates near the target instead of when it comes in contact with it. It is mostly used as a way for destroying planes with big caliber SPGs, and I love using it for that purpose because planes tend to like dropping on SPGs like that, and if they go in a straight line you don't really need to think about aiming that much. Aiming, however, for planes that are turning, going your way, it usually takes a long time and intuition to tell which plane does which kind of maneuver, and you need to actually be basically in the head of the pilot to get what they're doing to actually hit this. What I like about the proximity fuse, however, is that you're not completely vulnerable when the enemy tank approaches you and you have the proximity fuse, because there is a possibility of, with just one press of button, disabling the proximity fuse and use this shell as just standard HE, and then you can enable it back and fire the next shell. So you don't really have to reload specifically normal shell to deal with tank. HE also comes with one very special variant that I don't like at all, which is the hash. Hash is basically HE with squash hit. First it hits the target, it kind of like spreads on as much area as it could before exploding. It was supposed to give a lot of extra fragments within the enemy to basically deal with them very efficiently. However, I don't feel like those shells usually work. There are very specific vehicles on which those shells work, and on many others, if you have ability to mount them, just don't do that because it's garbage. So it is a very niche type of shell, and you basically need to know your vehicle to use it correctly. For example, FV4005 is equipped in only those, so it doesn't really get a choice. However, on this specific vehicle, those shells just work. Okay, now for the last kind of ammunition is we're gonna have the special, situational, and useless. First, we're gonna start with the useless, which is gonna be the shrapnel shell. And why I find it useless? First, it creates a small cloud of fragments behind the part that you hit. And it sounds pretty okay, but those shells do not really carry a lot of penetration power, hence making the prime target for them light armored vehicles or trucks with gun. However, hitting set vehicles with something that creates a cone of fragments is gonna be less effective than just hitting them with something that creates well, a ball of fragments, right? Like in case of HE. So you're just gonna be better hitting them with anything else. Their only advantage is that, well, since they are shrapnel and HE, they usually have little bit better velocity. Next, we have the SAP shells, which I also find a little bit of a waste. However, those also differ very much about the vehicle you're playing. For example, HE on KV2 is much better than SAP on KV2. However, SAP on Chihalongan is what I find more comfortable than HE on that tank. So what I suggest is that you should go into training room, and for the vehicle you are debating to use HE or SAP, test which is gonna be handling for you better. Next we got the smoke shells, and those are gonna be the situational ones. They usually have pretty same behavior as the standard HE in terms of velocity and drag, drop off, etc. However, you're probably gonna never actually have to use them, as their main use is just to shoot at something you cannot deal with, to blind it so you can get through the side or allow your allies to deal with it. It's so situational, and you need to be in correct vehicle for it, that very often you're just never gonna have a chance to use them. So very often what's gonna be just much better is just to use any other kind of ammo to shoot gun, trucks, etc. Disable enemy that way and get to the better position to shoot them. And last we have the ATGMs. Those are guided weapons with very high pen and high explosion, but very slow travel time. You can control those missiles along the way to the target, and just like with any other thing, it basically dies if you get obstacle between your target and you, or you make too much of a sharp movement, or just the guidance says that your missile is gonna hit the ground, and the missile is gonna hit the ground. The missiles have very high tendency of hitting the ground, and those who played tanks that rely on them know about this. However, they're pretty easy to well, fire, and all you need to do is keep your eye on the enemy to actually hit them. You don't need to hit specific parts. Usually center of mass is just fine. So good aiming in War Thunder isn't about memorizing some weak spots, it's about understanding your shell, your sight, your distance, and your ammo. And your position. Once you get that, every new vehicle becomes somewhat familiar in just a couple shots. If you want more videos like this, for example for RB and for naval, say so in the comments. If you have questions about specific things, I can also help you out. Basically, all you need to do is write a comment section and I will do my best to give you some assistance. It's been Senpai Silent. See you next time.